Repairing, rebuilding, reimagining. To that, I'd like to add another R word, resilience. This has been quite a year and a half, and yet you have been so resilient, so faithful. I just thank God every day for you, and your resilience inspires me. So thank you for being who you are, followers of Jesus. Repairing, rebuilding, reimagining, our convention theme as we're slowly coming out of the pandemic. It's a 2021 theme, but it was also the theme 2,000 years ago at the start of the Jesus movement. Many of you know that my favorite Bible story is feeding the 5,000. So if you've heard me preach about this before, bear with me and listen for a new context. 5,000 people followed Jesus to a deserted place. After hours of preaching and healing and forgiving, the apostles recognize that the people are hungry. They tell Jesus to send them away so they might go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy something for themselves to eat. Jesus tells the apostles, "You give them something to eat." And the apostles say, "We do not have enough. Only 5 loaves and 2 fish." Jesus takes the loaves and the fish. He thanks God for it, breaks it, gives it away. God multiplies the gift, and all are filled, and there's 12 baskets of broken pieces left over. In 2021, in an almost but not quite out of the pandemic church, many are saying what the apostles said. We don't have enough. We don't have enough people coming back. We hardly have a Sunday school left. We lack volunteers for so much that we did before. Trust me, I get it. But now skip ahead in the story of Jesus. It's after his death on the cross, and there aren't 5,000 followers anymore. There are only the 11 disciples and the faithful women. They are frightened and despairing. On Sunday morning, all Mary Magdalene wanted was to get the body back. There are people who had hoped, hope in the past tense. But this little group stays together. They stay together. And then God did a new thing and raised Jesus from the dead. Even that good news on Sunday morning is met with terror and amazement. The early followers of Jesus needed to repair, rebuild, and reimagine. Followers of Jesus have done this over and over again in 2,000 years. Everyone's favorite saint, St. Francis, heard Jesus calling him to rebuild a crumbling church building in San Damiano. He started a capital campaign and got the building restored. A good thing. But later he went deeper and realized that Jesus was calling him to repair, rebuild, and reimagine what the church was all about. And so here we are in confusing and challenging times, unsure exactly what the Jesus movement will look like. But we can learn from the apostles' mistake at the feeding of the 5,000. Can we look at what we have and say, this is enough, and trust in God's amazing grace? In our terror and amazement, can we trust the risen Christ to repair, rebuild, and reimagine his mission of mercy, compassion, and hope? Let's explore what that might look like. And I'll do it by using one of the many thriving ministries that we have in our diocese as a metaphor for the exploration. The ministry I'm thinking of is our chaplains to the Appalachian Trail. It's a simple concept. It's a big tent set up on the trail in Sheffield. In the tent is food, water, chairs, and battery packs, so hikers can power up their iPhone. The ministry is organized by our Episcopal Lutheran Church in Sheffield, Christ Trinity, and the UCC Church. Volunteers come from many churches. And as we talk with the hikers and hear their experiences on the trail, we ask a simple question. Why are you walking the trail? knowing that some hikers are walking just for a day, but many are walking the whole trail from Georgia to Maine. People come from all around the world to hike the AT. To come all that way, they are searching for something. Often it's young people going off on an adventure and trying to make decisions about their future. Sometimes it's older people who tell us, I had cancer a few years ago and I recovered. I'm walking the trail because I can, or in gratitude to God. Let's unpack this and see what this teaches us about being followers of Jesus in our time. Why are you walking the trail? A big part of the ministry is listening. Do you know that in the 4 Gospels, Jesus asks 307 questions? And people ask Jesus questions 183 times. Jesus only answers 3 of those 180 questions directly. Most often, he answers the question with another question. We all know that we live in a deeply divided nation. In this atmosphere, people don't ask questions anymore. They make demands. What if the church could model a different way of being? What if the church could be curious? What if the church was a place where we can ask the question, what are you searching for? And then, like Jesus, invite ourselves into real spiritual depth. Michael Curry says that evangelism happens when followers of Jesus go deeper in their own faith. An example of that in our diocese is the Loving the Questions program. In most years, 7 to 10 people join in this in-depth spiritual search. In 2020, we had 28 people in Loving the Questions. Thanks to Jenny Gregg and Craig Hammond and others who have made Loving the Questions such a gift to our diocese. So here's a big, audacious idea. What would happen if we had versions of Loving the Questions in all of our parishes, where all people went on a spiritual adventure? And isn't asking questions and listening a big part of our desire for racial justice? Racial injustice has been a tragic dimension of our country for 400 years. It's time, it's way beyond time, to question our history and white privilege, and may that questioning produce action that we might become the beloved community that Jesus intends us to be. The Appalachian Trail Ministry is a clear example of a phrase that's been popular in our churches in recent years. Finding God in the neighborhood. Have you heard that phrase? We get discouraged about declining church attendance, and we do need to pay attention to that. But the Spirit is not confined to the church. God is still out there being God. We ask, where are our young people? I know where they are. They're on the Appalachian Trail, and they're in schools. And so many of our churches have helped out schools by addressing food insecurity issues in our schools. St. Mark's in Worcester has reached out to that challenged neighborhood by bringing Marie's mission of St. Michael's on the Heights in Worcester, to give away diapers to families in need. And they're starting a tutoring program with students from Clark University as the tutors. Our cathedral and several churches are engaged in tutoring. And of course, our Walking Together in Worcester is all about finding God in the neighborhood. So many of you address the needs of your neighborhood by getting vaccines out there. We could add to Matthew 25, that passage that goes, when I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. We could add, when I could not figure out how I could get an appointment for a vaccine on my computer, you navigated it for me. Matthew 25. Another example of joining God's work in the neighborhood is our ever-growing veterans ministry. We're up to 12 locations now. And our outdoor church communities are an inspiration. There's plans to add others to those that already thrive in Pittsfield, Springfield, Worcester, and Northampton. Joining God in the neighborhood looks like our Latino congregations in Springfield, Worcester, and now Holyoke. Of course, the AT ministry reminds us of the beauty of God's creation. I was so aware this summer, when I was in the midst of that beauty, that hundreds of thousands of acres of God's creation to our west were on fire. Last spring, the bishops of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, with wisdom from Margaret Bullitt Jonas, published a document concerning the crisis of climate change. I invite you to read it and commit to pray, learn, act, and advocate. The AT ministry is a fine example of collaboration. Episcopalians, Lutherans, Congregationalists, all working together, and then inviting in other churches. You've heard me say this before. Whenever you think of starting a new ministry, ask the question, who can we work with? There are so many examples in the pandemic of churches working together with other churches and with social service agencies. The willingness to collaborate has become the new normal in Western Massachusetts. And we're doing that with our diocese to the east. The Exploring Common Mission Task Force is doing holy work, and you'll hear a lot more about that later in this convention. Yes, these are difficult times, but look at what we have. What I've mentioned in this address and so much more that I don't have time to include, other ministries that we'll celebrate later in this convention. Could it be that the work of repairing, rebuilding, reimagining was happening even before the pandemic? And we're called to thank God for it and let God multiply grace in ways that we have not yet seen. In our terror and amazement, can we look for more than just getting the old body back like Mary Magdalene wanted to do and follow where the risen Jesus leads? Greg Boyle, a Jesuit priest who has worked for 40 years with gangs in Los Angeles, he says this: St. Paul tells us to put on Christ. Putting on Christ is the easy part. Never taking him off, that's the challenge. Never taking him off, that's the challenge. Can we keep Christ on, even now, especially now? Our world needs Jesus' mission of mercy, compassion, and of hope more than ever. Our world needs prayer more than ever. So let's conclude by going back to the AT. In the southwest corner of Massachusetts. It is not the beginning of the trail. That begins in Georgia. And it's not the end of the trail. That happens in Maine. It's on the way. And that's what we are, on the way. I'm going to conclude with a poem prayer by Lona Fowley. And it's one that I've turned to many times in my journey. It's my prayer for us now. Between the exhilaration of beginning and the satisfaction of concluding is the middle time of enduring, changing, trying, despairing, continuing, becoming. Jesus was the man of God's middle time between creation and accomplishment. Through him, God said of creation without a mistake, and of accomplishment without a doubt. And we are in our middle times of wondering and waiting, hurrying and hesitating, regretting and revising. We who have begun many things and seen but few completed. We who are becoming more and less. Through the evidence of God's middle time, we have an establishing hint. We have a hint that we are not mistakes, that we are irreplaceable, that our being is of interest and our doing is of purpose, that our being and doing are surrounded by Amen. Jesus Christ is the completer, the completer of unfinished people with unfinished work in unfinished times. May he keep us from sinking, from ceasing, from wasting, from solidifying, that we may be for him experimenters, enablers, encouragers, and associates in accomplishment. Thus ends the prayer. But maybe we should end this address by saying that we may be for him, that we may be for Jesus, repairers, rebuilders, and reimaginers. Amen.